The will was read at 3:17 p.m. And by 3:18, the room exploded. Eleanor Grayson, perched like a vulture in her tailored black blazer, slammed her fist on the mahogany table, her voice a blade slicing through the stunned silence. "This is outrageous. That money belongs to May raised him. I endured his father. I earned it." Elliot Grayson, barely 22, sat frozen across from her, his fingers trembling around a crumpled tissue. The lawyer's words still echoed in his head. "To my son, Elliot, I leave my entire estate. Every penny, every asset, every memory of his father, now legally his." He felt the weight of it, not as triumph, but as a boulder crushing his chest. His stepmother's eyes burned into him, her rage a tangible force, but Elliot's mind was elsewhere in the man sitting quietly beside him, Caleb, whose hand rested gently on his knee under the table, grounding him. Caleb Whitaker, 27, wasn't supposed to be here. He was just Elliot's boyfriend, the one Eleanor had called that phase for years, dismissing their love as a youthful rebellion. But Caleb's presence was a lifeline, his steady hazel eyes a reminder that Elliot wasn't alone in this storm. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with a nervous tic, shuffled papers, avoiding Eleanor's glare. "Mrs. Grayson, the will is airtight." "Mr. Grayson's wishes were clear." Eleanor's laugh was sharp, bitter, clear. Richard was delusional in his final days. He didn't know what he was signing. She turned to Elliot, her voice softening to a venomous purr. "You think you can just take it all? You, who ran off to play house with him instead of caring for your dying father." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to scream that he'd spent nights by his father's bedside, holding his frail hand, whispering memories of fishing trips and late-night talks about constellations. But Eleanor had always been better at rewriting history. She'd married Richard Grayson when Elliot was 10, a whirlwind of charm and ambition, promising stability after Elliot's mother died. Over the years, her warmth had calcified into control, her love conditional on Elliot fitting her mold of the perfect son. When he came out at 17, her smile had vanished entirely. "I didn't ask for this," Elliot said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for any of it." "Then give it back," Eleanor snapped. "You don't need millions to live your lifestyle. I built this family. I deserve my share." Caleb's hand tightened on Elliot's knee. A silent "stay strong." Elliot met Eleanor's gaze, his heart pounding. "Dad wanted me to have it. I won't betray him." The lawyer cleared his throat. "There's more. Mr. Grayson left a letter for Elliot, to be read privately." He slid a sealed envelope across the table, the handwriting unmistakably Richard's. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, her silence more menacing than her words. That night, in their small Brooklyn apartment, Elliot sat on the couch, the envelope unopened in his hands. Caleb brewed chamomile tea, the kettle's whistle cutting through the quiet. "You don't have to read it now," Caleb said, setting a mug beside him. His voice was soft, but his eyes held a quiet urgency. He knew what this moment meant. Richard's last words could either heal or shatter. Elliot traced his father's handwriting, memories flooding back. Richard had been a quiet man, a literature professor who loved Whitman and Wilde, who'd once told Elliot, "Love is the only thing worth writing about." When Elliot came out, Richard hadn't flinched, just pulled him into a hug and said, "Be happy, kid." But Eleanor's influence had grown as Richard's health faded, her disapproval a constant shadow. Had his father's final act been defiance, or something else? He tore open the envelope, his breath catching. The letter was short, written in shaky script. Elliot, my heart. I failed you too many times, letting her silence us both. This money isn't just wealth, it's freedom. Live your truth. Love fiercely. And don't let anyone cage you. I'm proud of you. Always. Dad. Tears blurred Elliot's vision. Caleb pulled him close, his arms a fortress against the world. He loved you, Caleb whispered. He saw you. But Eleanor's words lingered, a poison seeping into Elliot's resolve. She wouldn't let this go. The will was a battle line, and she was ready for war. Elliot clutched the letter, knowing this was only the beginning. By morning, the news had spread. Friends texted condolences mixed with odd $12 million was no small sum. But Elliot felt no joy, only dread. Eleanor had already called twice, leaving voicemails dripping with veiled threats. We'll talk soon. Elliot. This isn't over. Caleb, ever practical, suggested a lawyer. But Elliot hesitated. This wasn't just about money, it was about his father's legacy, his love, his final stand. At a coffee shop in Park Slope, Elliot met his best friend, Mia, a 24-year-old artist with a knack for cutting through chaos. She's going to drag you through hell, Mia said, stirring her latte. You need to fight back, Elle. Not just for you, but for Caleb, for what your dad wanted. Elliot stared out the window, watching Brooklyn pulse with life couples pushing strollers, dog walkers, a world oblivious to his turmoil. What if I lose? He asked. What if she twists everything, makes me the villain? Mia leaned forward, her voice fierce. You're not the villain. You're the kid who loved his dad, who's trying to honor him. Don't let her steal that. Back home, Caleb was researching estate law, his laptop glowing in the dim living room. There's precedent, he said, scrolling through legal forums. Stepmothers contesting wills rarely win without proof of coercion. Your dad was lucid. Elle. This is solid. But Eleanor wasn't one to play fair. The next day, a process server arrived with a lawsuit. Eleanor was suing for undue influence, claiming Elliot had manipulated his dying father. The accusation stung, a knife twisting in Elliot's grief. He could still hear his father's voice, weak but clear, saying, "You're enough, just as you are." Now Eleanor was trying to erase that, to paint him as a schemer who'd stolen her due. Caleb pulled him into a hug. We'll fight this. Together. Elliot nodded, but fear gnawed at him. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a war for his identity, his love, his father's memory. And Eleanor was only getting started. The lawsuit hit like a tidal wave, flooding Elliot's world with dread. Eleanor's claim wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a public crucifixion. By week's end, local gossip blogs in their small Connecticut hometown had picked up the story, spinning it into a scandal. Stepmother alleges gay son manipulated dying father for millions. The comments were vicious, strangers tearing into Elliot's life, questioning his character, his love for Caleb, his right to exist. Elliot scrolled through the vitriol on his phone, each word a needle in his chest. Caleb snatched the device away, his voice firm. Don't do this to yourself. Elle. They don't know you. But the damage was done. Elliot felt exposed, his grief laid bare for strangers to judge. He hadn't wanted the money, only his father's blessing. But now even that felt tainted. Their lawyer, Sarah Nguyen, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who specialized in estate disputes. In her Manhattan office, surrounded by law books and framed degrees, she laid out the battle plan. Eleanor's case is weak, Sarah said, tapping her pen against a notepad. No evidence of coercion, and your father's mental state was documented by his doctors. But she's banking on emotional manipulation, painting you as the ungrateful son who swooped in at the end. Elliot's stomach churned. She's not wrong about me being distant. I wasn't there every day. I couldn't handle seeing him fade. Caleb squeezed his hand. You were there when it mattered. Don't let her rewrite that. Sarah nodded. We'll counter with testimony from your father's nurses, his friends, anyone who saw his love for you. But we need to move fast. She's already pushing for mediation, which means she's fishing for a settlement. Elliot shook his head. I'm not giving her a dime. This isn't about money, it's about what Dad wanted. Sarah's eyes softened. I get it. But mediation might expose her weaknesses. If she's bluffing, we'll know. Back in Brooklyn, the apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in. Caleb cooked dinner spaghetti with homemade marinara, his go-to comfort food, but even the familiar scent couldn't lift Elliot's mood. What if she's right? He asked, pushing pasta around his plate. What if Dad only left me everything because he felt guilty? Because I'm different. Caleb set down his fork, his gaze unwavering. Your dad left you everything because he loved you. Not because you're gay, not out of guilt, but because you're his son. Don't let her twist that. Elliot wanted to believe him, but doubt clung like damp rot. Growing up, he'd felt his father's love, but Eleanor's presence had always been a wedge. She'd insisted on private schools, church every Sunday, a life of appearances that suffocated Elliot's truth. When he'd brought Caleb home at 19, her icy silence had spoken louder than words. Now, she was weaponizing that history, turning his identity into a courtroom weapon. The mediation was set for a frigid November morning in a sterile conference room. Eleanor arrived flanked by her lawyer, a slick man named Vincent who oozed confidence. She wore a gray suit, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes locked on Elliot like a predator sizing up prey. You can end this now, she said, her voice low and deliberate. Split the estate, and we walk away. No more headlines. No more shame. Elliot's pulse raced. The headlines had already cost him friends who'd drifted away, whispers at his part-time bookstore job. But Caleb's presence beside him, steady as ever, anchored him. No, Elliot said, his voice stronger than he felt. This is Dad's will. I'm honoring it. Vincent smirked. Then we'll see you in court. And trust me, we're ready to dig deep. The threat lingered as they left, Eleanor's perfume trailing like a warning. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep, haunted by Vincent's words. Dig deep. What did they have? Old emails. Photos. Lies. He thought of his father's letter, now tucked in a drawer, its words a fragile shield against Eleanor's onslaught. Mia dragged him to a queer community center the next day, insisting he needed a break. The center was a warm, chaotic space, rainbow flags, mismatched furniture, and a group of teens painting a mural. You're not alone in this, Mia said, handing him a coffee. This place, these people, TVE got your back. A volunteer, an older man named Javier, overheard and joined them. Family fights are brutal, he said, his voice rough with experience. But you're fighting for more than money. You're fighting for who you are. Don't let her take that. Javier's words stuck with Elliot, a spark in the darkness. Back home, he and Caleb pored over old photos, searching for evidence of his father's love. They found a snapshot from Elliot's 18th birthday, Richard grinning, arm around Elliot, who wore a pride pin on his jacket. This, Caleb said, holding it up. This is what we show them. As the court date loomed, Eleanor escalated. A late-night call from an unknown number revealed a private investigator asking about Elliot's character. The next day, a coworker mentioned seeing a man snooping around the bookstore. Eleanor was building a case, not just on legal grounds, but on personal destruction. Elliot's resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for the money, he was fighting for his father's last gift. For Caleb. For the right to love without shame. But as the first court hearing approached, he couldn't shake the fear that Eleanor's lies might bury him. The courtroom was a cold, imposing space, all polished wood and fluorescent lights that made Elliot's skin feel too tight. He sat beside Sarah, his suit borrowed from Caleb's closet, the tie a little too snug. Across the aisle, Eleanor sat ramrod straight, her lawyer Vincent whispering in her ear. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, peered over her glasses as the hearing began. Vincent opened with a sledgehammer. Your Honor, Eleanor Grayson was Richard Grayson's devoted wife for 12 years, managing his care, his finances, his legacy. Elliot Grayson, however, was an absent son, more interested in his personal life than his father's well-being. He paused, letting the words sink in. We believe Richard was unduly influenced in his final days, coerced into a will that defies reason. Elliot's heart sank. Coerced. The word twisted his father's memory into something ugly. Sarah leaned over, whispering, Stay calm. We've got this. But the room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with accusation. Sarah stood, her voice steady. Your Honor, Richard Grayson was of sound mind, as confirmed by medical records and witnesses. His will reflects his love for his son, Elliot, who was by his side during his illness. Eleanor's claims lack evidence and rely on speculation. The judge nodded, jotting notes. Proceed with your evidence, Mr. Vincent. Vincent called his first witness a former nurse who'd cared for Richard. She was nervous, twisting her hands as she spoke. Elliot visited. Yes, but not as often as Mrs. Grayson. She was there every day, managing his medications, his meals. Elliot, he seemed distracted. Elliot clenched his fists, fighting the urge to shout. Distracted. He'd been drowning in grief, balancing college, a job, and a relationship Eleanor had never accepted. Caleb's hand found his under the table, a quiet anchor. Sarah cross-examined, her questions sharp. Did Elliot ever act against his father's wishes? Did he pressure him? The nurse hesitated. No. He was kind. Read to him sometimes. Poetry, I think. The testimony continued. A parade of neighbors and distant relatives painting Eleanor as the dutiful wife and Elliot as the wayward son. But Sarah countered with Richard's friends, who spoke of his pride in Elliot, his joy at his son's courage to live authentically. One friend, a retired professor named Helen, choked up as she recalled Richard saying, Elliot's my legacy. His heart is mine. By the end of the day, Elliot felt wrung out, the courtroom a battlefield of half-truths. Outside, reporters hovered, snapping photos as he and Caleb hurried to their car. Is it true you manipulated your father? One shouted. Elliot ignored them, but the question burrowed deep. Back home, Caleb tried to lighten the mood, ordering pizza and playing Elliot's favorite Fleetwood Mac album. But Elliot couldn't shake the day's weight. They're making Dad sound like a pawn, he said, staring at the ceiling. Like he didn't know what he wanted. Caleb sat beside him, their shoulders touching. Your dad knew exactly what he was doing. He chose you. Hold on to that. The next morning, Mia showed up with a plan. You need to tell your story, she said, pacing the apartment. Not in court online. People are eating up Eleanor's narrative because you're silent. Post about your dad. Your love for Caleb. What this fight means. Elliot hesitated. He'd never been one for public displays. But Mia was relentless. You're not just fighting for money. Elle. You're fighting for every kid who's been told their love is wrong. Show them you're not backing down. With Caleb's help, Elliot drafted a post for X, attaching the photo from his 18th birthday. My dad loved me for who I am, he wrote. His will wasn't about money, it was about freedom. I won't let that be twisted. Within hours, it had thousands of shares, messages flooding in from strangers who'd faced similar battles. The support was a lifeline, but it also drew trolls. Their hateful comments a grim reminder of the world's cruelty. Eleanor doubled down. Her lawyer filed a motion to freeze the estate, claiming Elliot was squandering funds. It was Aaliyah hadn't touched a cent, but the legal fees were piling up, draining his savings. Sarah warned that Eleanor might drag this out for years, hoping to break him. One night, Elliot found a box of his father's old journals in the apartment's storage closet. Reading them felt like hearing Richard's voice again, thoughts on love, loss, and the courage to defy expectations. One entry, dated a month before his death, stopped Elliot cold. Eleanor wants control, but I want Elliot free. The money's his, not because he needs it, but because she doesn't. He showed it to Caleb, tears streaming down his face. He knew she'd fight me. He knew. Caleb nodded, his voice soft but fierce. Then let's make sure he wins. The journals became their secret weapon. Sarah planned to submit them as evidence, proof of Richard's intent. But as the next hearing approached, Eleanor's team dropped a bombshell, a handwritten note, allegedly from Richard, promising her half the estate. The signature looked real, but something felt off. Elliot's gut screamed forgery, but proving it would be a battle of its own. The note was a grenade lobbed into the courtroom, its impact rippling through Elliot's fragile hope. Vincent held it aloft like a trophy, claiming it was found among Richard's personal effects, a last-minute change to his wishes. The signature was eerily familiar, but the words felt wrong, formal, cold, not like the father who'd scrawled love letters in poetry. Elliot's chest tightened as the judge ordered a handwriting analysis. Sarah was livid. This is a stall tactic, she whispered to Elliot during a recess. They're buying time to dig up more dirt. We need to push back hard. She suggested hiring a forensic document examiner, but the cost was steep, and Elliot's funds were dwindling. Caleb offered to dip into his savings, but Elliot refused. This is my fight, he said, though the words felt hollow. It was their fight, had been from the moment Caleb chose to stand by him. Back in Brooklyn, the weight of the case pressed heavier. The ex-post had rallied support, but it also painted a target on their backs. A brick shattered their apartment window one night. A note tied to it, greedy fag. Caleb called the police, his jaw tight, but the officer's dismissive tone, probably just kids, only deepened Elliot's despair. He sank onto the couch, head in hands. Maybe I should settle? Give her half and be done. Caleb knelt before him, his voice fierce. You're not giving up. Not on your dad. Not on us. That note's a fake. Elle. You know it. We'll prove it. Mia arrived the next morning, her energy a whirlwind. She'd rallied friends from the community center, who showed up with coffee and determination. We're your army, she said, grinning. One friend, a tech-savvy grad student named Leo, offered to dig into Eleanor's digital footprint. People like her always leave a trail, he said. Emails, texts, something. Leo's search uncovered a lead, An email from Vincent to a shady printing company, requesting specialized document services. It wasn't proof of forgery, but it was enough to cast doubt. Sarah filed a motion to investigate, and the judge granted a delay, giving them time to gather evidence. But time was a double-edged sword. Eleanor's team used it to leak more stories to the press, painting Elliot as a manipulative opportunist. Elliot's bookstore job became unbearable. Customers whispered. Co-workers avoided him. He quit, unable to face the scrutiny. Caleb took on extra shifts at his graphic design job, but the strain showed in his tired eyes. "We're in this together," he kept saying, but Elliot felt the guilt of dragging him into this mess. One evening, Javier from the community center invited them to a support group for queer youth facing family rejection. The stories were raw disownment, betrayal, resilience. A trans teen named Riley shared how their parents had cut them off after coming out. "But I found family here," they said, gesturing to the room. "You will too." Elliot felt a spark of hope. He wasn't alone. These strangers, bound by shared pain, reminded him why he was fighting not just for his father's will, but for the right to live unashamed. He spoke, voice shaking, about his dad's letter, the love that fueled this battle. The room listened, some nodding, others crying. Caleb squeezed his hand, pride in his eyes. The forensic analysis came back inconclusive. The signature was close enough to Richard's to cause doubt, but not definitive proof of forgery. Sarah was undeterred. "We've got your dad's journals," she said. "They show his state of mind. And we've got witnesses who'll testify to Eleanor's controlling nature." The next hearing was brutal. Vincent called a family friend who claimed Richard had confided regrets about Elliot's choices. Sarah countered with the journals, reading entries that celebrated Elliot's courage. The judge listened, her expression unreadable. But Eleanor's composure cracked. She interrupted, shouting, "He was my husband. I deserved his loyalty." The outburst earned a warning from the judge, but it was a glimpse into Eleanor's desperation. Elliot saw it, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of power. She wasn't untouchable. She was scared. That night, Elliot and Caleb sat on their fire escape, the city humming below. "We're going to win this," Caleb said, his voice soft but certain. "Not just in court, but for us. For your dad." Elliot leaned into him, the stars above a faint echo of his father's love. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed they could endure it. The journals, the community, Caleb's unwavering love, they were his armor. And he'd need every piece for what came next. The trial stretched into weeks, each day a grind of testimony and tension. Eleanor's team leaned hard into character assassination, dredging up Elliot's college year's late-night parties. A brief rebellious facito painted him as unstable, unworthy. Vincent even subpoenaed Elliot's old therapist, probing for cracks in his mental health. Sarah objected fiercely, and the judge limited the questioning. But the damage was done. Elliot felt stripped bare, his past weaponized. At home, Caleb was a rock, but even he showed strain. Late nights poring over legal documents left dark circles under his eyes. One evening, as they washed dishes, Elliot noticed Caleb's hands trembling. "You don't have to do this," Elliot said, voice breaking. "You could walk away. Live a normal life." Caleb dried his hands, turning to face him. "You are my life, El. Normal or not, I'm here." He pulled Elliot into a kiss, fierce and grounding, a reminder of what they were fighting for. But the weight of Caleb's sacrifice gnawed at Elliot. Love shouldn't cost this much. Sarah uncovered a breakthrough. A former accountant for Richard revealed Eleanor had siphoned funds from his accounts years before his death. funneling them into private investments. Its motive, Sarah said, pacing her office. She's not just after the will covering her tracks. The evidence wasn't enough to dismiss her claim, but it chipped away at her saintly facade. Elliot took the stand on a rainy December morning, the courtroom packed with reporters and curious locals. Vincent's questions were relentless, twisting every choice Elliot had made. Did you visit your father to secure the inheritance, knowing he was vulnerable? He asked, his tone dripping with insinuation. Elliot's voice shook but held. I visited because I loved him. He was my dad. He wanted me to be happy, not rich. He clutched his father's letter in his pocket, its words a lifeline. Sarah followed with gentle questions, letting Elliot tell his story is coming out. His father's pride, the nights reading poetry by his bedside. The jury listened, some leaning forward, others wiping tears. Eleanor's testimony was a masterclass in performance. She wept, recounting her years of devotion, painting herself as a martyr betrayed by a selfish son. But Sarah's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Grayson, did you ever discourage Elliot from visiting his father? Eleanor denied it, but her hesitation was palpable. Sarah pressed, presenting a text from Eleanor to Richard. Keep that boy away. He's a distraction. The jury stirred, whispers rippling. Outside, the queer community rallied. The ex-post had sparked a movement, with hashtags like Justice for Elliot trending. Strangers sent letters, shared their own stories of family rejection. One, from a lesbian couple in Ohio. Read, your fight gives us hope. Keep going. Elliot pinned it to their fridge, a reminder of the bigger battle. But Eleanor wasn't done. A week before the final hearing, she leaked a doctored email to the press, allegedly from Elliot to his father, begging for money. The email was clumsy, its tone off, but the headlines didn't care. Greedy son's plea exposed. Elliot's stomach dropped. He hadn't written it, but the public didn't know that. Caleb called Leo, who traced the email's metadata to a server linked to Vincent's firm. It was circumstantial, but enough to file a motion for sanctions. The night before the final hearing, Elliot couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor, surrounded by his father's journals, reading passages about love and freedom. One entry stood out. Elliot's braver than I ever was. I hope he knows that. Tears fell as Caleb wrapped him in a blanket, whispering, he's still with you. The final hearing was a showdown. Sarah presented the accountant's testimony, the journals, and the email's shaky origins. Vincent countered with more witnesses, but their stories felt rehearsed, less convincing. The judge called a recess, leaving everyone on edge. Elliot and Caleb sat in a quiet corner, hands clasped. Whatever happens, Elliot said, I'm glad it's with you. Mia joined them, her optimism infectious. You've got this, Elle. The truth's on your side. But as the judge returned, Elliot's heart pounded. The verdict would decide more than money. It would shape his future, his father's legacy, and the love he'd fought so hard to protect. The judge's gavel fell, silencing the courtroom. Elliot's pulse thundered as she began, after reviewing the evidence, including Richard Grayson's journals, medical records, and witness testimonies. This court finds no evidence of undue influence. The words hit like a lifeline. The will stands as written. The estate belongs to Elliot Grayson. Relief flooded Elliot, but Eleanor's sharp gasp cut through it. She stood, her face a mask of fury, and stormed out, Vincent scrambling after her. The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. Caleb pulled Elliot into a hug, his breath warm against Elliot's ear. You did it, he whispered. Your dad would be so proud. But victory felt fragile. Outside, the press swarmed, shouting questions about greed and family betrayal. Sarah ushered them to a side exit, but not before Elliot caught Eleanor's glare from across the street. "This isn't over," her eyes promised. He shivered, clutching Caleb's hand. Back home, the apartment was a sanctuary, but the weight of the fight lingered. The ex-community celebrated. Messages pouring in, "You showed them love wins." Mia threw an impromptu party at the community center, complete with rainbow cupcakes and a playlist of Elliot's favorite songs. Javier raised a toast to Elliot for fighting for his truth and ours. The room cheered, but Elliot's smile was strained. He felt his father's absence keenly, the joy bittersweet without him. The estate's transfer began, a slow process of paperwork and appraisals. The money $12 million in stocks, property, and savings was overwhelming. Elliot didn't want a mansion or a yacht. He wanted to honor his father's wish for freedom. He and Caleb talked late into the night, dreaming of a future unburdened by Eleanor's shadow. "Maybe a scholarship fund," Elliot said, "for queer kids who've been kicked out, who need a chance." Caleb's eyes lit up. "Your dad would love that. A legacy of love, not greed." But Eleanor wasn't done. A week later, a new lawsuit landed, this time for emotional distress, claiming Elliot's public campaign had defamed her. Sarah called it a desperate move, likely to be dismissed, but it meant more legal fees, more headlines. Elliot's resolve wavered. "She'll never stop," he told Caleb, staring at the ceiling. "She'll haunt us forever." Caleb took his hand, his voice steady. "She can try, but she won't break us. We've got each other, and now we've got the truth on our side." Mia and Leo dug deeper, uncovering more on Eleanor's finances. They found offshore accounts linked to her name, suggesting she'd hidden assets during her marriage. Sarah filed a counterclaim, accusing Eleanor of fraud. The evidence was thin but enough to scare Vincent, who began pushing for a settlement. Eleanor refused, her pride outweighing reason. The community center became Elliot's refuge. He volunteered, helping teens like Riley navigate their own battles. One night, Riley showed him a drawing of family of chosen siblings, vibrant and fierce. "This is what you're fighting for," Riley said. "Not just money, but us." Elliot hugged them, tears in his eyes. This was his father's legacy love that lifted others up. As winter thawed into spring, the legal skirmishes continued, but Elliot grew stronger. The scholarship fund took shape, named after Richard, offering grants to queer youth for education and housing. Donations poured in, fueled by the X campaign. Elliot spoke at a fundraiser, his voice steady for the first time in months. "My dad believed in love," he said. "This is for him, and for every kid who needs to know they're enough." Caleb stood in the back, beaming. Later, on their fire escape, he proposed a new idea, a community space tied to the fund, a place for queer youth to find safety and support. Elliot's heart swelled. This was what the money was for, not power, but possibility. But Eleanor's shadow loomed. A late-night call from an unknown number brought a chilling message. "You'll regret this." Elliot's blood ran cold, but Caleb was already dialing Sarah. The fight wasn't over, but Elliot was no longer the scared boy in the lawyer's office. He was ready to face whatever came next, with Caleb, his found family, and his father's love guiding him. The threat hung over Elliot like a storm cloud, but he refused to let it paralyze him. Sarah traced the call to a burner phone, unlinked to Eleanor, but the timing was no coincidence. "She's trying to intimidate you," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "Stay vigilant, but don't let her control you." Elliot nodded, but fear gnawed at him. Eleanor's desperation was a wild card, unpredictable and dangerous. Caleb installed a security system in their apartment, his practical nature a balm to Elliot's nerves. "We're not hiding," he said, testing the cameras. "We're just being smart." Elliot admired his resolve, but couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was planning something bigger. Her emotional distress lawsuit was floundering. Judges saw it as a rehash of her failed will contest, but she wasn't one to admit defeat. The Richard Grayson Scholarship Fund launched with a quiet ceremony at the community center. Elliot stood before a small crowd, his voice steady as he spoke of his father's love and the fund's mission to support queer youth. Riley, now a regular volunteer, presented him with a framed version of their drawing, now the fund's logo. "You're changing lives," they said, their eyes shining. Elliot hugged them, feeling his father's presence in the moment. Donations grew, and the community space Caleb envisioned took shoppy, renovated loft in Brooklyn, with art studios, counseling rooms, and a library of queer literature. Elliot poured his heart into it, using his state funds to cover startup costs. Every decision felt like a tribute to his father, a way to extend his love beyond the grave. But the work was exhausting, and the legal battles drained what little energy remained. Eleanor's next move came in the form of a public interview on a local news channel. She sat poised, tears in her eyes, claiming Elliot had stolen her future and defamed her as a gold digger. "I loved Richard," she said, her voice breaking artfully. "I only want what's fair." The interview reignited the media frenzy, with new headlines questioning Elliot's motives. X exploded with both support and hate, the divide growing uglier. Mia organized a counter-campaign, rallying allies to share stories of the scholarship fund's impact. A queer teen named Sam, one of the first recipients, posted a video thanking Elliot for covering their college tuition. "I was homeless," Sam said, voice cracking. "Now I'm studying engineering. This is what love looks like." The video went viral, drowning out Eleanor's narrative, but the toll on Elliot was heavy. One night, he broke down, sobbing in Caleb's arms. "I just want to live," he said. "I want to love you, build this center, honor Dad." "Why is that so hard?" Caleb held him, whispering, "Because it matters. Because you're fighting for something bigger than her." Sarah uncovered more evidence, a witness, a former housekeeper, who'd overheard Eleanor pressuring Richard to change his will months before his death. He refused, the housekeeper said in a deposition. Said the money was for his boy, to keep him free. The testimony was a blow to Eleanor's case, but Vincent spun it as hearsay. The judge, however, seemed swayed, her questions to Vincent sharper, more skeptical. Elliot and Caleb threw themselves into the community space, painting walls and shelving books. The work was grounding, a reminder of why they endured. One evening, as they hung fairy lights in the library, Caleb pulled Elliot close. "This place," he said, "it's us. It's your dad. It's every kid who needs a home." Elliot kissed him, the world fading to just them, their love a quiet rebellion against Eleanor's hate. But the peace was short-lived. A fire broke out at the community space late one night, the flames caught early by a neighbor's call. The damage was minimal, but the fire department's report suggested arson. No proof tied it to Eleanor, but Elliot knew. Her threats, her desperation, it all pointed to her. Sarah filed for a restraining order, citing the call and the fire. But Eleanor's lawyer denied everything, claiming Elliot was fabricating a conspiracy. As the legal battles dragged on, Elliot found strength in the community. Riley, Sam, and others became his chosen family, their resilience a mirror of his own. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, was fighting for them, for every queer kid who'd been told they didn't belong. The fire hadn't stopped them. It had only made them fiercer. The arson investigation yielded no concrete evidence against Eleanor, but the restraining order was granted, a small victory that kept her at a distance. Elliot felt a flicker of relief, but the scars of the fight remained. The community space reopened stronger, its walls now covered in murals painted by queer youth, each stroke a defiance of hate. The Richard Grayson Center, as they named it, became a beacon, drawing kids from across the city who needed a safe haven. Eleanor's lawsuits crumbled one by one. The emotional distress claim was dismissed for lack of evidence, and the fraud counterclaim gained traction as more financial records surfaced, revealing her hidden accounts. Vincent withdrew as her lawyer, citing irreconcilable differences, and Eleanor's public image faltered. The media, once her weapon, turned on her, with headlines exposing her greed. She vanished from the spotlight, her silence a concession of defeat. Elliot and Caleb stood in the center's library on its official opening day, surrounded by books and laughter. Riley cut the ribbon, their smile radiant. "This is home," they said, and Elliot felt his father's love in the words. The scholarship fund had grown, supporting dozens of kids, and the center was thriving, a testament to what love could build. One evening, as they locked up the center, Caleb pulled Elliot aside. Under the glow of a streetlight, he knelt, a simple silver ring in his hand. "I've loved you through every storm," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Marry me, Elle. Let's build our future, not just this place." Tears streamed down Elliot's face as he said yes, the ring a promise of a life beyond the fight. They married in the center's garden the following summer, surrounded by Mia, Riley, Sam, Javier, and 100 others who'd become family. The ceremony was simple wildflowers, acoustic guitar, vows that spoke of resilience and love. Elliot wore his father's watch, its ticking a quiet reminder of Richard's presence. As they danced, Caleb whispered, "We made it." Eleanor sent a letter months later, a single page of stilted apologies. She claimed she'd been misguided, driven by grief and fear. Elliot read it once, then tucked it away. Forgiveness wasn't his to give yet, but her words no longer held power. She was a shadow, fading against the light of his new life. The center grew, its impact rippling beyond Brooklyn. Elliot and Caleb became advocates, speaking at events about love, family, and the fight for acceptance. The estate's wealth funded not just the center but shelters, scholarships, and legal aid for queer youth nationwide. Each victory was a tribute to Richard, a way to keep his love alive. Years later, Elliot stood at his father's grave, Caleb by his side. He placed a copy of the center's first annual report beside the headstone, its pages detailing lives changed, futures built. "You gave me freedom, Dad," he whispered. "I hope I made you proud." As they walked away, hand in hand, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the cemetery. The fight had been brutal, but it had forged something unbreakably a legacy of love, not just for Elliot and Caleb, but for every soul they'd lifted along the way. The will had been more than money. It was a declaration that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for.